Eiley Smith, and I'm a marketing manager here at Bright Horizons supporting our North American centers. But I'm also a mom to a spunky, cheerful, and often quite chatty almost 3-year-old. Before we meet our guest today, Karen Chiron, I'd like to quickly review the ways you can interact today during our webinar. First, our social media team is tweeting today's webinar using the hashtag BHParentWebinar. If you want to follow along or retweet your followers, you can do so right from the webinar console by clicking on the Twitter button. If you're not on Twitter, no worries. The chat room is always open. Please use it to exchange ideas, tips, and stories with each other. You can access the chat by clicking the blue button with the chat bubbles. Throughout the webinar today, we'll also toss out some questions you can discuss there in chat. Here's the first one for today. Let us know in chat, what's that one thing you love the most about your child's personal style or temperament? And while you're answering that, I just want to go over a couple of rules for our chat. Because there's hundreds of you on this webinar, we do ask that you refrain from profanity or trolling and be respectful of others' ideas. We also ask that as much as possible, we keep the chat on topic and avoid controversial statements. Unfortunately, violators will have to be blocked. Okay, let's move on to the purple Q&A button. Please use this button to report any technical issues today. We have folks on standby who are here to help. If you have questions for our guests, you can feel free to pop them in there as well. If we have time at the end for Q&A, we'll see what we can cover. You can download the webinar resources at any time with the resource button. That's the one with the little clipboard. We have a number of resources in there for you from Karen and from Bright Horizons. Now let's meet Karen. Welcome, Karen. Thanks for joining us today. Tell us about yourself.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks to Bright Horizons for inviting me to speak on temperament tonight. I have a background and a master's in early childhood education, and I've been working with challenging behaviors, resilience, and social emotional development in children for over 20 years, both in my work at the Devereux Center for Resilient Children and now presently in my work at the Education Development Center, or EDC. I also have 3 daughters of my own, ages 15, 13, and 10. So if there's one thing I think I'm looking forward to most tonight is that I get to know a little bit of something for the next hour, since these days in my house, I think my kids think neither my husband or I know much of anything. So I'm really looking forward to these.
I'm really looking forward to this discussion today, too. And I'm not looking forward to what's going to happen 12 years from now, though, Karen. Before we dive into our topic, I want to let our audience know of a surprise book giveaway. We have 25 copies of Socially Strong, Emotionally Secure, 50 Activities to Promote Resilience in Young Children, a book co-written by Karen. If you're interested in winning a copy, click on the button and fill out the form. We'll let you know after the webinar if you've won. Karen, can you quickly tell us about the book?
Sure. This book was a collaboration between myself and a former kindergarten preschool teacher, Nefertiti Bruce. And it's published by Griffin House and distributed by Kaplan Early Learning Company. We created this book in 2011 to be full of ideas for both teachers and parents for how they could promote resilience through doing activities in the home environment and also in the school environment that promote strong social skills and strong emotional stability. So not only does the book have activities and ideas, but there also is in your resource widget a download for the parent activities that you can print out and try in the home environment as well.
Awesome. Good luck to everyone entering. Now I want to dive into our topic of today, temperament. We have an interactive webinar planned for you, designed to help you reflect on your child's temperament as well as your own. First, we're going to cover the fundamentals, what temperament means, how it develops, and what's called goodness of fit. Karen will let us know about that in just a minute. Then we'll go through the 9 standard temperament traits and give strategies for each. We'll wrap with a brief Q&A at the end if there's time. Karen, you ready to get started?
I am.
Let's start with the basic question then. Where does temperament come from? There were a lot of questions from the registrants about this, and some wondering if temperament develops over time, or some wondering if it changes as the child gets older.
Sure. Each child is born with his or her own temperament and their individual way of approaching the world. So a child's behavior and approach to the world is shaped by their experiences and the interactions with the adults in their life. But it's very important for us to understand a child's temperament because it can help us provide more responsive and sensitive care for the child. So some aspects of temperament are noticeable from birth and continue throughout life. But right from the start, we each have a unique genetic makeup, which includes our nervous system and the way we take in sensory stimulation.
So we're just born with the threshold for what we can take in or handle, in other words.
Yes, exactly. So, for example, some people might like bright lights, loud music. Others may prefer low lights, music quiet. Some people eat and sleep in pretty regular patterns, and others have really no pattern at all. So the concept of temperament helps us understand that children engage with their world a lot according to their inborn characteristics.
I love this. If you're in chat, tell us something about your child that's been present since the day your little one was born, and what can you still see, feel, or experience today? While you guys are thinking and chatting, I'll share with you about something about my son. So my almost 3-year-old son, Cab, he's always thrived on routine, which is not really a problem for me because I'm kind of a routine fanatic myself. This was made really evident to me recently when my husband and I went away for a weekend, and we had my mom watch him for us. She said as soon as she picked him up from school that day, throughout the evening and into the day, the whole entire evening was scripted for her. As soon as they walked into the house, he told her to take off her shoes and where to put them. He instructed her how to cook dinner, and even went as far as how to tell her how his stuffed animal should be laid out in his crib. And it just really drove home to me that I really have a creature of habit and routines in my daily life, something, like I said, I see in myself and that him and I share. And I see in chat we have a lot of, Deanna says both of our kids are flexible. That's great. Personally, if I had two and they were both flexible, I'm all about that. Karen, what else do we know broadly about temperament?
There are ways temperament traits can be grouped. These 3 groupings go by many different grouping terms, such as flexible, feisty, fearful, and then the original form in 1960 through the work of Thomas and Chess, we used to refer to as easy, difficult, and slow to warm. You can also have what's called a mixed temperament, which means pieces of one and pieces of another. So we prefer the terms actually fearful, flexible, feisty over the word difficult because as you'll learn through this presentation, even children that might have that type of temperament can benefit from having parents and caregivers who really understand their temperament and approach it in a way that promotes their success. So more important than the overall groupings is understanding your child's traits that form their temperament, and there are 9 of these traits that we'll be touching on throughout this presentation tonight with a specific focus on a few of those.
Let's lean into that point that you just made, Karen, about children benefiting from parents who can really understand their traits. That's related to the concept of goodness of fit, correct?
Yeah, so here's an example of that. If you arrive at a birthday party for one of your children's friends who's turning 5, and there are loud noises, bright lights, lots of unfamiliar faces, maybe even a clown in the corner, your child might cling to your leg, maybe not want to engage with others. What would you do?
And I can say actually this recently happened to me. It wasn't a clown. It was Elsa the princess. She came to the party and Cal was not a fan of Elsa at all. I just let him give him the time to warm up. He ended up not wanting to do anything with Elsa, and that was okay. We ended up kind of directing him to the other activities that were in the room that were more to his liking. In chat, let me know, can you relate to the birthday party or my Elsa scenario?
So that's a good example too, Eileen, that you just shared about goodness of fit, because if you force your child into an uncomfortable situation, it might be frightening for him. It likely may not go very well for you either. So some things, and I see some things might be coming through the chat now that we could also be sharing. I think some things that we could suggest are making sure you allow your child time to explore from a distance. Maybe it is hiding behind your legs or off to the side or sitting on your lap or in close proximity to you. Another thing you can do is to read your child's cues. So if you notice your child smiling at something that was said or something that's happening, you could use that as an opportunity to engage her and ask a question like, oh, it looks like those kids are having fun dancing. Or maybe even gently offer prompts. So if you feel like your child may be starting to relax, maybe you could even say, hey, would you like to go sit at the edge of the magic show with me? Or maybe let's go see what kind of snacks they have over there, so you can start to use some prompts to help your child slowly engage when they feel more ready.
So Goodness of Fit is really just knowing about your child's temperament and using the knowledge to help him or her navigate those situations in life. This seems like a great segue into our deeper dive about the temperament traits.
So there are 9 traits that can help you describe your child's temperament, and you'll see these in different places by slightly different words depending on who the author is, and some folks have changed them just based on the research that they have done. But in general, these are the 9 traits that children can have that help make up who they are as their temperament. So each has very extreme ends. For example, some can be high or low. You can have more of something, less of something. You can do something slow or fast. So everyone has these traits in them to one extent or another, or maybe you're balanced somewhere smack in the middle, but we all have pieces of these traits that help make us who we are. So I feel like, most of the time we get questions from folks are when we're managing the extremes, when parents have the greatest opportunity maybe to understand and adapt to their child's temperament when they do have a child maybe that's at one or the other extreme, very high or very low on some of these different traits. So no matter what your child's temperament, the best thing that you can do as a parent is to really honor and respect your child for who he is or where he or she is right now. Remembering that all of those pieces of unique combinations of these traits, highs and lows and levels, are really what makes your child special and unique, makes your child who they are.
I'm really looking forward to getting into each one of these, and this is how we're going to do it. First, we're going to describe a trait and give a couple examples of how it can show up in your child. Some of the traits will have a poll asking you to reflect on yourself and your child's temperament. And then Karen will give us strategies for fostering that goodness of fit for both you and your child. Let's jump into the activity trait.
So activity level refers to the amount of activity from high to low that we engage in throughout the day. So some of us are always moving and physically active. Others of us are more sedentary. We spend most of our time engaged in quiet activities. The child with the high activity level is likely to be in their element in gym class, playing tag during recess. Maybe they have a little bit more difficulty staying settled during quiet seated activities. On the other hand, a child who has low activity level might prefer sitting, drawing, reading during free time rather than going outside and playing a more active game.
Okay, speaking of activity, everyone, our first poll is coming up. You're going to be asked about your child's activity level and your own. If you want, respond in chat if you'd like to. Here we go. When thinking about activity, first, my child and I have the same high energy and enjoy doing lots of things. Are you? My child and I have the same low activity and prefer to be low key or chill. Or is it, my child has high energy while I have low energy? Or my child has low energy while I have high energy? Select the one that you think works best for you. Okay, let's take a look at what our audience has to say, Karen.
All right, so our results are coming up right now. For those of you who voted, we have a very good percent, 65% of folks say, my child has high energy while I have low energy. Some of this may be also that some of our children are 5 and some of us are in our 40s and we're tired. But at the same time, think about the type of energy that you had when you were a child. Did you have high energy when you were a child too? Because that's probably a little bit more tied to your match and temperament. 25% say we have the same high energy. We both enjoy doing lots of active things. And then about 8% of folks say that they have the same low energy or enjoy kind of chilling out together. And then a few say that my child has low energy while I have high energy. So we have some mixed results with the majority of saying my child has a lot of energy.
Yeah, Renique says that her child's high energy makes her high energy feel low. And I'm with you. Excellent. Okay, Karen, so what are your tips when it comes to the activity trait?
So if you and your child both have similar high energy, I'm sure you're always actively playing together, but also just know when it's time to take a break. Sometimes we can sort of push the limits and then hit our wall, if you will. So it's important to also know when it's time to kind of take a little bit of a break and slow down. So kids with a lot of energy oftentimes crash. We want to note those signs when your child has had enough and help ease that transition so that they're not going so fast and then all of a sudden stop. It's more of a slowing down process. If you and your child have both similar low energy, you could insert small bursts of activity into your more slow-paced routine. So you're assuring that both you and your child are getting enough physical activity. So for example, if your child wants to play a game, maybe play the game outside so that you could allow for some spontaneous pop-ups to explore nature, or to get up and take a walk during, or to move around a little bit during the activity. If you and your child are different, it's important that you help your child recognize what her body is telling her it needs. So you can help by reading those signs in yourself. You can help your child start to read those signs in herself as well, even pointing out things like, I can see your hands are shaking and you're going so fast right now. Let's take a breath or two. So just starting to bring her awareness back into her body. Another way that you might try to help your child if your energy levels are different, you might set a timer to remind yourself, okay, we've done a lot of active, go stuff. Now let's take a little shift and read a book together or do something a little bit more quiet so that you can make sure that you're helping her be able to modulate between those two types of activity. And then finally, when you do have downtime, make sure you're using it as a time to actually engage with your child instead of using that as a time to check up on your own technology or whatever that might be. But to use that time to actively, even though it's relaxing time, it can also be interactive time. So just to keep that in mind as well.
Those are great tips. I want to move on to the next trait that we have, adaptability.
So adaptability refers to the amount of time and effort it takes to adapt to either a new person, new situation, or a new concept. So this can range from being very easily adaptable to being slow to adapt, or some people call this slow to warm. So those of us who are highly adaptable typically easily integrate into new routines, expectations, and concepts in our life. And those who are slow to adapt often struggle, sometimes struggle a lot with these types of changes. So in a classroom, you might see a child who's highly adaptable sort of go with the flow, regardless of the changes in the day, or if the routine changes, or the class structure, or the rules. Where a child who's slow to adapt may need extra time or reminders or help getting into the flow of a new year. They may struggle if you change something quickly, like change a rule or change an expectation or change the routine. So that same child may be a little bit slow to understand or integrate that new concept. Even though they're very able to adapt, they might have struggle and not feel as comfortable with that quick shift or quick transition as another child.
We saw a lot of this type of question as well from webinar registrants. Lots of questions and comments about their children struggling with transitions and even having temper tantrums and meltdowns. Let us know in chat if that's something you can relate to. We don't have a poll for this one, but I would love to know, like I said in chat, if the temper tantrums and meltdown transitions are an issue for you. And since many of us need help in this area, Karen, let's jump straight into your tips on adaptability while everyone's typing.
Sure. Well, first of all, if both you and your child are both adaptable, then that's just great. But at the same time, make sure you both are assertive when you need to be. You hold true to your beliefs and values, and you help your child find their voice when they need to say, no, that's not okay. I need to stop for a second and ask a question. If you and your child are both not adaptable to changes in routine, it's important that you recognize these behaviors in yourself and you talk through them when you're going through something and it's hard for you to adjust, to be able to recognize that you're having a difficult time and talk through how you're handling that situation. So by you modeling that self-talk, it will help your child be able to then kind of hear what you're going through, and over time, as they get older, be able to adapt some of your strategies into the way they're able to adapt as well. So you might also just want to make sure, if you and your child differ here, recognize that there may actually be a good reason behind your child's resistance to change. So try to get to the bottom of maybe what they're trying to communicate with you. And if you can't identify a good, solid, logical reason why they're resisting or adapting to something, then you can also use it as an opportunity to, again, talk with your child, work together to sort of take baby steps toward where they might need to go. If a transition is really hard, like say, for example, bedtime, a lot of families tell us that, oh my goodness, bedtime is just torture. It takes way longer than it needs to, and both my child and I end up getting upset because it can't quite get through the routine. And break it into small little pieces. And once you find success with one small piece, really celebrate that small success. Don't try to tackle a huge change at one time, but work on smaller wins to really help your child eventually get to where they need to go. And it's just also important that later on you come back and you might reflect on that situation. So if your child had a hard time adjusting or adapting to something, in that moment when they're so upset may not be the moment to be able to reason and to talk through it. So come back later in the day and say, hey, remember earlier today when we were trying to leave the playground and told you about 5 minutes left and then told you 1 minute, and I stood next to you and I tried to hold your hand and it was still really difficult for you to leave the playground. Let's talk a little bit about that. Maybe what could we do next time? Could we do the slide once together and then we leave together? Or come up with some ideas where you talk through with your child so that you can use them later on in another situation when that arises.
I like the idea of reflecting with your child as a way of preparing for future situations. We do the same thing where we do kind of like, okay, in 5 minutes we're going to leave the playground. Is a big bone of contention when we have to leave the playground. And I typically say 1 more minute, and he bargains with me, no, 1 more minute for about 5 minutes. So I like the idea of talking it through with him and saying, okay, maybe next time we could, go on the slide, or I love that idea. I would love to talk about distractibility now.
No, I did just see a great question pop into the chat, Eileen, that was sort of related to this. I just wanted to quickly draw attention to it. Someone had asked a question of, my child is a year old and still has a difficult time sort of sitting and attending to a story together. Is this normal? And I think that's probably something that a lot of parents are feeling. I would say, depending on what, if the reading of the book is maybe too much right now, then really just using that book as an opportunity to interact together, handing the book back and forth, pointing out a picture, making the noises that one of the animals in the book might make. But interacting with the book is just as important as sitting down and reading that story, because what you're getting with your child is that one-on-one time. You're bonding, you're getting that attachment formed together. You're showing a love for a book by sharing, different pieces of it, the hardness of it. You can tap the book, and there are different things you can touch and feel within that book. So if your child at age 1 is still not wanting to sit and listen to a story, just sit and interact with the book and look at the pictures together and point out things that they might be interested in with the pictures. So you can start, again, very small when it comes to something like that. I just wanted to draw that out. And distractibility really, as we all know, it's really our degree of concentration and how well we're able to pay attention when we're not particularly interested in something. So if your child gets easily sidetracked when they're trying to follow a routine, that is a high distractibility. So it can often be a positive when it's easy to divert a child from like an undesirable behavior by kind of redirecting them quickly to something else. But it can be seen as a negative if it prevents the child from finishing a task or finishing something that they're doing, maybe in school or something.
I love how distractibility really ties back to kind of inborn traits at birth. I'm not sure many of us had considered that maybe a baby whose head is whipping around during bottle time is really showing innate distractibility. What strategies do you have here?
So I would say to really get the goodness of fit with distractibility would be to think about some creative ways, first of all, that you could minimize distractions or use redirection. So a couple of creative ways might be to use like a hula hoop on the floor to mark a special space if your child's working on something. so that they could focus on staying in or near that space, and other children will know not to come near them while they're kind of working on something specific and individual that they want to do. You could use a piece of cardboard folded, like a little partition, if they're trying to, hone in and do a puzzle, or you'd like them to, kind of get a little bit more used to doing some alone time or special work at a desk. You could remind your child to take a break as needed. So if they start to do something and they're distracted, they could get up, walk around a little bit, and then you direct them back to the activity for a few more minutes, because it's hard to sit for a long period of time when you're little. A minute or two at a time is enough for a small child. So expecting them to be able to sit for 10 minutes to work on a 5-piece puzzle or something might be too much. It's important to also have the next thing planned. So when you start something, you have a transition of where you're going next. So it's clear that you can say to the child, okay, we're going to have a snack next, or whatever it might be, so they can be able to move on to the next thing more easily. A lot of children might benefit from having a transition warning like we talked about before, if they're not able to sort of stay focused on something, to know, hey, we're just going to do this for another 2 minutes, or until, the lights go down dim. Right now the lights are way up high, but when they get really low, we'll be done the activity. So for older children who are school age, you could actually do a self-check where you finish an activity and then you ask the child, okay, how focused were you on what you were just doing? And they sort of get in the habit of doing 2 thumbs up, or 1 thumb up, one thumb down, or 2 thumbs down. It just brings more awareness to them of how on task they were doing something. So I've tried this strategy with my 13-year-old with homework before, where she'll sit down to be focusing on homework, and I'll notice her sort of getting up, getting a snack, coming back, using the bathroom, coming back, finding 5 other things to do while she needs to be in the room for 30 minutes doing homework. And I'll reflect with her after and say, hey, how focused were you on what you were just doing? And she sort of realizes, oh my gosh, I got up 5 times during that half an hour, and I really wasn't that focused. So it can just help her bring a little bit more awareness to her behavior.
That's great reminders for all of us. And as you were talking through this goodness of fit, I noticed that a lot of folks in the chat were talking about the countdown and transition warnings, especially it looks like more like the toddler age and preschool age children. So we are all in this together with our countdown. Okay, next up, approach.
So approach refers to our initial response to a new person, new place, new event, new thing, new idea. We can have be very highly approachable to almost the opposite, which is highly withdrawn. So those of us who have like a high approachability, we readily jump into new tasks, meeting new people, trying new foods. Others of us who are on the lower approach side are sometimes, again, called highly withdrawn. So we resist trying a new activity. We avoid a party with strangers. We step back from a new kind of food. A child who has a high approach or is highly approachable will not hesitate to start a conversation with a new student or a new teacher, or jump into an activity. A child who's more withdrawn may struggle with new students or new situations and avoid things that might make them or be uncomfortable or unfamiliar to them.
I feel like this could be kind of a double-edged sword. So many positive things that could come from being highly approached, but possibly also some safety concerns as well.
This is true. We'll talk about that a little bit when we get into the strategy.
Awesome.
So if you find that you and your child both take on new situations with ease, this is great. Just be sure, as Eileen just mentioned, to be very aware of necessary safety cautions, rules, stranger danger. It's actually an excellent book that I loved. It's an old school book. Some of you might have grown up with it, by the Bernstein Bears, and it's called The Trouble with Strangers. And the parents teach the children about not judging a book by its cover, and in the case of the book, they actually talk about an apple. There's an apple that looks really nice on the outside, and on the inside, when they cut it open, it has a worm. There's another apple that looks kind of bruised and bumped, but it was the most delicious tasting. So it's just a very simple way to talk to their children about not just being able to tell based on somebody's looks if they're friendly or not friendly, or a good person or not a good person for you to be around. So we always approach with caution. So important, even if your child is very outgoing and likes to talk to everybody, to make sure they also have awareness about strangers as well. And if you and your child both prefer to kind of stay back and maybe have a little bit more of a withdrawn personality, you might have to have a kind of strategy for yourself to help you get more involved or engaged when entering a new situation. Maybe you decide that, okay, we're going to give ourselves 5 minutes to just sit back and watch. And then maybe we're going to get up a little bit. So it gives you an opportunity also to challenge yourself to approach others and to go into a situation that you know is safe, and also model with your child, even if you're not feeling like approaching, modeling for your child how they can do that, because that is a skill they will need to do as they go throughout life. And if you and your child are pretty different in this way, it's important not to force your child into an uncomfortable situation that might lead to more fear or anxiety. We talked about the birthday party earlier. You could allow your child just to observe instead of engage. Just make sure you debrief later and talk about what they learned or what they got out of it, and to still be engaged even though you might be sitting back observing. It's important that you still reflect on what the child's learning and getting out of a situation, even if they don't want to be the center of attention. In fact, some cultures prefer to identify more with the group rather than stand out individually. So we also need to make sure we're respectful of others' cultural considerations and not force someone to be in the center leading a group if that's not comfortable to them.
All right. We're moving on to what's probably a hot topic now for everyone, mood.
So mood is your overall quality of emotion throughout the day, which, as we know, can range from very positive to very negative. Those of us with positive moods probably spend most of our day in a pleasant mood. We like to put a positive spin on things, even problems and challenges we might see as opportunities. Others that have a more negative mood may seem more critical throughout the day. We might think they see the glass as half empty. So a child with a positive mood is generally pretty pleasant in the classroom, may even struggle to recognize when there are difficulties kind of percolating. And a child with a more negative mood might be likely to respond with a frown, a head shake, a critical comment. So although some children with a more negative mood may seem less upbeat, there are often times when these children actually make a pretty astute observation because they don't really miss anything. They're kind of tuned in to look for things that aren't going the right way. So that's just something for us to think about, too, as we consider our own mood.
So since mood was such a popular trait that we wanted to talk about, we have a poll for this one. So let's jump into it, and let's take a moment to think about your child's mood and your own. So when thinking about mood, is my child and I both generally positive outlooks and reactions to things? Or are you more, my child and I both tend to be more reserved and serious? It could also be that your child's more positive and that you're more serious, or your child's more serious and you're more positive. Which one do you think fits you and your child best? Okay, let's take a look at what our webinar audience has to say, Karen.
Okay, our results are in, and they are pretty mixed across the board. The highest percentage at 36%, you and your child both generally have positive outlooks and reactions to things. The second highest was the bottom choice, my child is more serious, where I'm more positive. The third choice at 22.7%, my child and I both tend to be more reserved and serious. And then the bottom choice, which still isn't really that low, my child is more positive and I'm more serious. So we really are across the board when it comes to mood, as far as if we match with our child or if we maybe are a bit different from our child.
There's also some folks in chat that have multiple children that said we're pretty much split. So, and we heard that too in our registrant comments. So let's go into the goodness of fit and mood, Karen.
So if you and your child are both generally positive, great. There's really not too much that can be said about that. If you feel like your child has more of a negative outlook, sometimes people, I see in the chat someone saying it's serious, a nice way of saying negative. So you could be negative. At times that negativity might take sort of a serious tone to it where there's not a whole lot of fun, which is why we were using the word serious as kind of, interchanged with negative, because a lot of times that negativity does imply a lack of fun. So there's nothing wrong with being serious, really. I mean, we all know a lot of serious people, but just to make sure that you are able to find things that make you happy and please you. We do worry about kids that have really nothing that seems to please them or make them happy. That would be an opportunity for you to definitely reach out, talk to your physician, talk to your child's educator. But if you find that there are things that your child is serious about, but at the same time they can have fun, they do enjoy things, there are times they smile and are happy, then there are kids that are just a little bit more kind of negative mood in nature than others. So one way that you guys can check in together is to kind of check in daily and see what kind of moods everyone in the house is in that day. Sometimes you'll note that typically someone who's in a great mood might be in a more of a negative mood and vice versa for something else. So it's important that you avoid saying things like, smile, be happy. We all are entitled to feel our own feelings, and having someone tell us that we need to smile when the last thing we feel like doing is smiling is very important. So we shouldn't have to put on a happy face just to please others. As I said before, it is important, though, that you know your child has some things that can make them happy. If general bad moods continue over and over day after day with no real hope or joy in sight, then it is important that you reach out to a professional.
Great tips. Now, let's talk about intensity.
So intensity refers to our strength of our response, and this again can range from high to low. So these responses can be demonstrated either outwardly, or we can hold these feelings in and experience them inwardly. It's not always easy to judge whether someone's intensity is high or low because, again, they might be having a more inward reaction. So those of us who have high intensity responses often show strong emotions. When we're happy, we're very, very happy. When we're sad, we're very, very sad. Angry, very, very angry. Others of us who have a low intensity of response, we sometimes barely show a blip on the screen when our emotions are set off. So a child with high intensity may become overly silly at a birthday celebration, maybe super angry during a conflict on the playground, overly nervous or anxious when meeting someone new. And on the other hand, a child with low intensity may not seem to react at all. So she doesn't seem to experience extreme excitement over an exciting event or intense disappointment over a failure. So it's important for us to learn to read the reactions of our child. Sometimes people will misjudge low intensity for not caring. It could just be part of their temperamental traits.
That's an important one. We also saw a lot of questions about this as well from registration. Please feel free to share in chat if you can relate to this and any tips you have to help you manage your child's intensity. And as we get the chat going, Karen, what are your tips here?
So if you and your child are both pretty intense, it's not just as easy to say, make time to unwind, because truly a lot of us struggle with even knowing what it is that we need to help us unwind. And our child may be the very same. So you need to try and experiment with different types of things that will help both you relax and your child relax. It may not be the same thing for everyone. In fact, we worked with a little child at one center who we used a back scratcher with the child and found that we used it on their feet, and they were able to settle down and calm down. If you would have used a back scratcher on another child in that class's feet, they might have flipped through the roof. So the kind of techniques that we use aren't always the same, so we need to try different things and see what it is that help us best relax. You know, it's important to know as you go through life to find healthy, safe ways to calm and to relax when needed. We all know that as adults. We know adults that still don't have healthy, calm, safe ways to relax when they're upset. So the importance of stressing this in childhood is really important. And if it's okay if people differ. If you recognize those differences and you can really relate to them, again, goodness of fit is about not always having the same match, but being able to appreciate and understand when somebody is different from you. So you might be able to make light of a situation. If someone is very, very intense, you maybe try to, make it a little bit of a lighter situation, but it's also important to recognize when to back off and to provide some space for someone to really process. So, you know, a broken shoelace on the playground may not seem like a big deal to us at the mature age of 35, but to a 5-year-old, it could seem like a very big deal.
So let's talk about the next trait then, sensitivity. It also came up a bit in the registration questions, and we actually have a poll for this one too.
Sure. So sensitivity refers to the amount of stimulation ranging from high to low that we require before responding. So this is a little bit tricky. You'll see on the poll it uses the word low threshold. If you have a low threshold, it means that you are highly sensitive. You have really barely any threshold before you feel something. The other thing that you'll see on the poll, it'll say high threshold, which means you can tolerate a whole lot before you feel something, and that's associated with low sensitivity. So a child with low sensitivity may be injured and not even seem to notice their pain. At the other extreme, a child with high sensitivity may be bothered by the slightest noise, a frown from the teacher, a tag in their clothing, a buzz of a light, a seam in a sock, something that we may not even realize as adults.
Okay, so let's get ready for the poll now. And I would love to know, when thinking about sensitivity, my child and I have high thresholds for stimulation, the more the better. My child have low thresholds for stimulation, less is more. My child has a high threshold for stimulation while mine is low, or my child has a low threshold while mine is high. I'll give everyone just a moment here. And then let's take a look, Karen, at what the audience has to say about this poll.
Okay. Okay, so results are in, and our winner here is my child and I both have low thresholds for stimulation. Less is more. And the second highest is the bottom one that says my child has a low threshold for stimulation while mine is pretty high. And then we're, again, the next one in, my child has a high threshold for stimulation while mine is low. Coming in at the bottom is my child and I have high thresholds. The more, the better. So it definitely seems like the low threshold or high sensitivity is the common theme of a lot of the audience on our call tonight.
So what's some goodness of fit ideas, Karen, or strategies that we can do with sensitivity?
So if you and your child both have similar sensitivity, it's important that you kind of acknowledge how you feel. Either we both feel things pretty deeply or we don't, or we're somewhere in the middle. At times, this could lead you, if you have high sensitivity, at times this might mean you overreact or your child overreacts. Just recognizing sort of a logical reaction to a situation and helping your child better recognize a logical reaction to a situation will help them be able to handle that situation the next time. So we don't always handle things right in the moment, and we might be very sensitive and overreact to something. But being able to reflect and kind of come back to it later and talk about it, and hey, what's a different way that I could have handled that? Or hey, did you think about doing this? Or maybe let's try this next time. So it's really important to take those minutes to debrief and to come back later and to look. If you and your child both are pretty low sensitivity, you have a pretty high threshold for all kinds of input and sensory activities, it's important to still make sure you're engaging your senses on a regular basis. So you can engage in sensory awareness activities together to make sure you're staying tuned into your world. So, for example, close your eyes, listen for how many sounds you can hear together. When you witness a scene, maybe ask your child, hey, what do you think that child was feeling in that situation? Or if you read a book together, ask them, what do you think that character could have done there? What do you think she was noticing or observing? So helping them really be more sensitive to their world. Just again, paying attention, doing things like I Spy, but continuing to not just let the world pass you by, but to engage and to listen and to smell and to taste and to, see in all of the ways that we can keep our senses alive. If you and your child differ in this way, it's important to recognize that there are things that upset you that may not upset your child and vice versa, and that's okay. Somebody asked in the chat, it seems like a lot of these are, why is one high and one's low? What if we're both in the middle together? That's a great question. The reason that we did this webinar and a lot of the questions that come up about temperament are when you have a child who is a very high or a very low in one of these traits, or when perhaps you're pretty high and your child's pretty low. That's usually when the conflict arises, when you have a difficult time understanding each other and finding that goodness of fit. So it's perfectly fine for your temperament to be smack in the middle of all of these different traits we're talking about tonight. That's perfectly fine. There are a lot of people with that type of temperament. But a lot of the questions that do come in, both at, I'm sure, Bright Horizons, to the teachers that work there, as well as others, you know, what do I do when we're not the same? Or what do I do when my child's really intense and I'm not? Or vice versa. So again, that's why we're talking about this tonight, with the highs and the lows more than the middle.
Okay, so let's briefly talk about the next trait on regularity.
Sure. Regularity is our predictability of our bodily routines, like sleeping, eating, even going to the bathroom. It ranges from being highly regular to highly irregular. So those of us are highly rhythmic, or we often are kind of hungry, use the bathroom, feel sleepy at the same time each day, while others of us who are highly irregular don't seem to have an internal schedule or a rhythm. We might wake up at various times. We may feel ready for a nap at various times. And again, just the kind of the unpredictability of our day. So this can prevent a challenge for a child who's asked to adhere to a kind of a more rigid school schedule where everyone's eating at the same time, or using a bathroom break at the same time, or resting at the same time. If they have not developed that sort of regularity or that rhythmicity, then that can make it a difficult transition.
That sounds like another call for managing routines. Let us know in chat about any routines related to regularity that you use with your child. And Karen, while everyone's filling that out, why don't you give us some tips for this?
Sure. You know, it's important, even if you're not a routine-loving person, it's important for you to realize the comfort for your child in that routine. So to talk to your child about why we do things, you know, throughout the day, maybe sometimes in the same order. If there is going to be a change in the routine, to stress that flexibility is fine and we're going to have something new or different today, but to prepare your child. So that routine you can almost wrap around a child, like almost like a blanket, where they feel like they have a predictable kind of a feel to their day. So again, we all know we have to go with the flow when the routine changes, but knowing in general, like for example, that our bedtime is the same or nearly the same almost all the time unless there's a special occasion, then that helps the child. It helps your kind of power struggles and battles be less as well. Because if bedtime is 7 o'clock one night and 9 o'clock the next night and 8:25 the night after that, then you're going to find yourself in a lot more battles with your child where they're trying to establish, okay, well, I pushed it last night till 9 o'clock, so I'm going to try to push it tonight till 9 o'clock. So again, establishing these routines, even though you yourself may not be a routine-loving person, it really does help children to sort of understand that predictability of the day.
Those are great, and we have a bunch coming in on chat as well. I want to quickly cover our last temperament trait, persistence.
So persistence is how long we stick with tasks, regardless of their difficulty, kind of ranging from very long in persistence to very short, and as someone said earlier, or smack in the middle. Some of us are highly persistent, even in the face of a tremendously difficult task. We just keep going and going and trying. And others might spend just a short time on a challenging task before we give up and move on to something else. So a child with a high persistence resists giving up. They practice a task repeatedly until they master it. The same child might struggle in an activity and just kind of move on, even if they haven't mastered it or completed it. The child with short persistence may stop again, and they, may not even want to get to the last page of a book because they are not, able to kind of persist and stay with that story long enough. So this is tied into, and I put this here, some folks use the word, and this is a very popular term that a lot of parents kind of struggle with, I guess, would be frustration tolerance. This is the level of difficulty we're able to deal with before we become completely frustrated and kind of fall apart. So our frustration tolerance can range from very high to very low. So those of us who have high frustration tolerance are able to experience a lot of difficulty before we start to just kind of break down. We can feel frustration, but it's more how we deal with our frustration. There are others who have very low frustration tolerance, and they become frustrated very easily and are not able to stick with it. So this is something that, again, we all need to continue to work on being able to deal with frustration. It's okay to feel frustrated. I think sometimes you'll hear someone say, don't be frustrated. That's like my least favorite thing ever, because it's perfectly fine to feel frustration. We all feel it. Every single day we probably feel some kind of frustration. But it's how we handle our frustration that's really important. It's having strategies and ideas and ways to kind of breathe through it and think through it and take baby steps and all of the other strategies that we talked about tonight. It's how we handle our frustration, not the fact that we shouldn't feel it.
Yeah, a lot of people on chat are talking about the frustration and making sure that the routines are in place to help avoid that piece. Let's do our final poll about persistence here. So I want you to take a moment to think about your child's persistence and your own. When thinking about it, do you find that your child and you are both keep at something regardless of the obstacle? Or is your child and yourself willing to try things, but you don't necessarily overdo anything either? Maybe your child is highly persistent and you're not. Or your child's not generally persistent, but generally I am. And I do remember seeing somebody in chat had mentioned that they themselves were very persistent, highly or easily frustrated, and their child was the exact opposite. So let's see what everyone else has to say.
Okay, our results here, the highest percentage, 37.7%. My child is not generally persistent, and I generally am. The second highest is my child and I will try new things, but we're not, neither one of us is going to overdo it either. The third highest is my child and I are both going to keep trying at something regardless of the obstacle. And the final one is my child is highly persistent and I'm not. So again, the top one here is my child is not really sticking with things as much as I am. Now, first of all, again, remember how you were when you were 4 or 5. You are now a little bit older. You have more coping strategies. And I think, one of the most important things is that, yes, our temperament stays with us. It is who we are, but at the same time, we develop tools and skills and almost like a little toolbox of coping strategies that we take through us to be able to handle the highs and the lows in a lot more socially appropriate ways as we go through life.
Yeah, in chat, people are saying that their children have high persistence towards things that they want to do, but low persistence towards the things that they don't want to do.
Yeah.
So give us some examples of the goodness of fit with persistence.
So a couple of things you can try to do if you feel like you like your child to develop more persistent. You can teach her how to and kind of model how to breathe in, breathe out, count to 3, maybe use a signal like a light flash when something's almost about to end. You can help your child, again, take a break to find a quiet space and return to the activity later. You could try to use a timer to help her stay with something a little longer than she usually would. If you know she can maybe stick with it for 1 minute, try to set the timer for 2 and encourage her to stick with it for those 2 minutes. And maybe take a photo of each of the steps along the way to show her success. So if she's having a hard time with something over the long haul, maybe take a picture and say, look what you did here, and celebrate the little pieces along the way. For older children, helping them understand words like, I'm getting frustrated, can you help me please? Using words to be able to, exhibit when something is becoming too much are really important ways to recognize when your own body cues are telling you you've had enough. So there's a strategy I really like. This is in your resources widget, and it's called Flip It. And this is an excellent strategy that can be useful to help children problem solve through things. This was developed by my colleagues, Rachel Sperry, at the Devereux Center for Resilient Children. And the Flip It stands for feelings for F, limits for L, inquiries or questions for the I, and prompts for the P. And it goes something like this. So if you have a child who's frustrated, just kind of angry, or having a strong emotion of some sort and needs to work through a problem, you don't have to work through these in the FLIP order, but this order might be helpful to say something like this. Oh, you sound so angry. That's the feeling. But we use gentle hands with our friends. That's the limit. What's another way you could ask for a turn with that toy? That's the inquiry. And then we can offer prompts if our child can't come up with solutions on their own. Okay, maybe you could say please. Maybe you could have me set a timer and you could have a turn next when the timer goes off. So those 4 steps of SLIP, of acknowledging that a child is having a strong feeling, sometimes that's just a really important place to start. A lot of times as parents or as teachers, we might want to jump in with the limit. No, we don't do that. You know, whatever it might be that the child's doing, we jump right to limits. It's important to also acknowledge that child is having a very strong feeling, and connecting with them and showing you appreciate that feeling can help you better work through that problem-solving process with them. So that's one of the resources that you have in your resource widget at the bottom. And then finally, the last one that I want to talk about here, it's important, is self-talk. There are some great ways to talk through things so that children hear how you're talking through a problem and they learn the steps that you're using. There are also some really excellent songs. There's a group called Growing Sound. You can find their music on iTunes, and it has a lot of social emotional themes for young children. So there's one song I particularly like. It's called I'm Gonna Find a Way, and it's kind of like I keep on working until I figure it out. I'm gonna find a way. And there's a lot of different ways that they talk in the song about ways you can work through a problem. So once when my daughter was about 5, I was trying to get a double stroller into the trunk of my minivan. And the 2 littler ones were in the car, and she was strapped in, and she could tell I was getting frustrated with every time I tried to jam that big wheel into that minivan, and it wasn't going to work. And so she could hear my frustration growing with every grunt. And she knew this song, and she started singing, I keep on working until I figure it out. I'm going to find a way, with her little 5-year-old cute voice. So even though I still wanted to kind of smash that stroller a little bit, I actually found myself smiling and realizing she had a little bit of self-talk, recognizing frustration, and seeing that there was a strategy to help get her through it.
Wow, Karen, this has all been great and super helpful. I've jotted down a couple notes, including that Growing Sound. That was that group on iTunes. I'm definitely going to give them a search after we get off the phone together. Thanks so much. Now, we've covered so much today. I want to quickly summarize, Karen, what we've been talking about.
Sure, and I know we're almost out of time. I just want to say that these 9 traits contribute to who your child is, but their personality is also part of who they interact with and their environment and all the experiences they have. So I hope you took away an idea from tonight that's going to help you and your child have more good times together. And if you're looking for something, just a couple of quick tips to write down and say, I'm going to try this immediately or apply this. The first one would be, number 1, to model the behaviors you want to see in your child. They are like little sponges. They are sponges for the good stuff we do. They are sponges for the not so good stuff we do. The second would be to establish and stick to a general routine, such as a consistent bedtime. So enough rest and regular routines for a child are very comforting and help them do their best learning. And then the third and final tip I would say is when you're present, really be present. It's easy to get distracted in our own busy lives and not fully pay attention. One of my children caught me recently doing this, and she said, hey, Mom, you're giving me that hum treatment again. You know, that It can happen to all of us, and not one of us as a parent is perfect, not one single one. We just need to keep doing our very best with the mission of raising kind, helpful, respectful kids.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Karen. And I want to quickly remind everyone, you can download all the resources now on the resource widget. If you can't grab them, don't worry. We're going to send you all the resources plus a link to view the recording of this webinar within a week of today's broadcast. And I just want to thank everyone who came on the line today, especially you, Karen, for joining us this evening for this Family Matters series webinar.
Thanks for having me, Bright Horizons, and thanks, Eileen, for guiding me through the night.